Hello, Africa, and welcome to the Kungana Africa Project podcast, or in short, the Kungana podcast. I am your host, Abu Rengwi C, coming to you from our Johannesburg studios. This is a bit more than just a podcast. It is a project aimed at breaking down some of the boundaries that divide us as a people, the boundaries that divide our beautiful continent of Africa. Over the next coming months, we will do this by collecting and sharing stories from all parts of Africa. Stories from our sisters in Ghana, our brothers in Nigeria, our uncles in Namibia and the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Malawi to Cameroon, Ethiopia to Libya, Cairo to Harare. We will connect with as many people as we can. Our aim is to record and publish 1,000 African voices. So twice a month, we will share with you a long-form interview with a person of interest. So we invite all fellow Africans on the continent and in the diaspora to be part of the Kungana Africa project. Kungana is a Swahili word for connect. So our task is to connect with the 1 billion inhabitants of our beautiful continent, people who call this continent home. So without further ado, I introduce to you our very first guest, Miss Evita Situma. Hi, Evita.
Hi, Aburengwi.
How are you?
How are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you?
No, I'm great. Please introduce yourself to our listeners. Who is Evita Situma?
Well, at the very least, I would say I'm an African. I have a very mixed background. I am a Black female professional who's currently in the banking sector. That's me in a very brief nutshell.
Okay, and maybe going back to sort of how you grew up, where were you born? What were some of the first memories you have? Did you grow up in one place, or did you find that you were moving from one place to the next?
Well, for me, it is a bit of a story, but I was born in Zimbabwe, in Harare, in the 80s, when life was a bit, I want to say, calmer. My parents are from Kenya and Tanzania, respectively, and I did my first, I want to say, 12 years in Harare, and then moved to a little place called East London, the Eastern Cape, where I did my high school. And, that was pretty much my early years, my environments that I grew up in. And, I want to say my earliest memories, when I think about it, are mostly about, being at home in Harare and, the environment that I grew up in, was very much, I almost want to say, very, very quiet, but, very friendly and dynamic in its own way. It really just had a spirit of its own compared to when I moved to East London, where it felt like there was a lot more clear divisions in sort of living and being in the city in East London.
Okay, so your parents are of East African heritage, but you grew up in Southern Africa.
That's correct.
Must be interesting then for someone like you to determine whether there are subtle differences within the continent. I mean, do you find that when you move from Southern Africa to East Africa or even other parts of Africa that there are differences in how people are or how people behave in general?
I would definitely say there are differences. I mean, growing up in Zimbabwe, there was a very strong Kenyan community there. And so we would do as much as possible to sort of follow life in Kenya. So, whoever travels brings back newspapers. We observe the public holidays. We go through so many, celebrations, with fellow Kenyans, even though we were so far away. So it was like Kenya away from Kenya. But that's like the social aspect of it. And for me as a child, I'd experienced that maybe, mostly on the weekends. Then you go to school on Monday, and now you're in a Shona-based environment. And, Shona was like, besides English, Shona was my first language that I learned. And, I picked it up. I wasn't so great at the theory of Shona in terms of the actual language, and, but the speaking and conversing assimilated very nicely into that. And you wouldn't often see too much difference because there's a lot of similarities between Shona and Swahili. And culturally, some differences. So it was really, I think I'm glad that my parents were open-minded, because I didn't know or feel differences and feel divisions until much later in life, because they embraced the culture where they were at the time. And they were those kind of people. They weren't, we're Kenyan and we're only going to do things in a Kenyan way. We're not going to acknowledge that we're in a different environment and how people do things there. We will acclimatize and integrate to a point. But they didn't, so to speak, stop me from learning Shona, which I know from fellow expats or other people, friends that I've had who grew up in different countries, where sometimes that would be a thing, where it's like, no, we don't want you to learn local languages because it would be seen as if you're diluting your heritage and not wanting to focus on that.
It's quite interesting, the concept of diluting your heritage. I think the point that we fail to realize is that the more cultures you learn, in a way, it strengthens your own heritage because it puts things into perspective. Maybe, Eve, are there some things from your childhood, if we take a Freudian approach, if you look back into your childhood, are there things that your family believe contributed to the person that you are today? Maybe some of the things that stand out, some of those vivid memories.
I would say it's you might think it's a bit silly, but something simple like walking to school. Where I stayed, school was exactly like 1.2 kilometers from the house, and the shops were, equidistant in that sense. And the walking to school, I was in my neighborhood, I was the furthest child who lived. And then so as I would walk to school, I would pick up other kids as we walked to school, type of thing, as you do as friends, and then vice versa coming back. And in those walks, my mind would roam. Sometimes I would actually walk and read, which is a bit dangerous. But, my mind would roam. But it also gave me a sense of, ownership of, I suppose myself, what I'm doing, going to school, and responsibility. And things like not watching TV and rather being told, go play outside. And legit, in the 80s, there weren't a lot of things. There wasn't there were conventional toys, but we didn't have that. And, something simple like school holidays, now make up games and, you know what a locust looks like. Some kids today don't know what a locust looks like because they don't have that space or freedom, or the environment around them has changed so much. You don't actually see a lot of insect and, unique fauna and flora life. So things like that taught me about being observant, resilient. And my family as well, because we're a large family, I have quite a few siblings. I have 7 siblings in total. And the age range and the differences, definitely, I didn't realize it at the time, but definitely taught me about understanding people and where they're coming from, and people management, if I want to say, or relationship management. Because my one sister always jokes, she says, like, no, I could make friends with a brick wherever I go, whether it's an old person, a young person, boy, girl, whatever the case is. I am that person where I will just connect with people in a fashion. And, some people find that a bit weird, but I think that's a big part of how I grew up, because I learned a lot about people, and it's made me a better person for it.
Okay, but I could quite like your locust reference. Like I've got a 12-year-old boy, and for me, growing up in the village, a locust was something you not only saw every day, but if you didn't see it in the field, you'll see it on your plate because it forms some kind of diet. So my son had a school project, and we had to now go out and actively search for a locust. And for him, it was quite a fascinating exercise, whereas for some of us, we grew up amongst things like those. So, yeah, I can relate to that reference. So you started school, I assume, based on what you said, in Zimbabwe before moving to East London. Mm-hmm. Now you've got a career where you have to navigate using certain skills. Mm-hmm. Looking back, how does the level of education you received back then compare to the level of education that you perhaps wish you had received? Or are you finding that the skills that were imparted on you are still serving you well in the workplace?
It's actually, this question is actually something I would say is actually close to my heart, because I believe a lot of Africans are let down between the education system and, career development. There's massive gaps where people could be doing so much more or have accomplished more, but because of lack of knowledge or awareness, there's shortfalls and a lot of frustration. So I'll probably answer this maybe in two parts. So in growing up in Zimbabwe, the primary school I went to was a public primary school. And it essentially was, I suppose, somewhere between what most people would call a Model C, or I don't feel like they didn't have a Model C sort of system there. It was public school or private school. And they had rural schools, where, most people would go to, schools set up in the rural area, not necessarily meaning that they're backward and standard of education is vastly different, but because it's in a rural area, there's more likely for you to be in boarding. But why I'm mentioning this is because at my public primary school, the curriculum was, I want to say, detailed, and even the extracurricular activities also encouraged people to think and to do but differently. So something simple like, and it's simple to me because I didn't know anything better or know any different. Something like learning to swim was stock standard at that primary school and a lot of those public primary schools, because that is what their Department of Education wanted to drive, is that people to be capable in all aspects. So learning to swim, which I took for granted. I learned how to swim. I love swimming. But then coming to SA and then realizing that this is not a stock standard thing. And a lot of people have a healthy aversion to it. And to me, it's like, because I'm passionate to it, I can't understand why. But then, you mature and you think, okay, fine. But it's the system that they were exposed to in the first instance, where this was not stock standard. For someone to even have a soccer field and a netball field was already a bonus in some schools. But for us growing up in Zim, that's the one thing beloved Mr. Mugabe insisted on, is people having good foundation for education and having good access. And the teachers were passionate about their students. They were passionate about what, whether people did well or not. So they will tell you and take ownership if you were battling. Whereas here, doing high school here, that really depended on the teacher. I mean, the most passionate teacher I think I came across was my maths teacher, Mrs. Steenkamp. Which was, slightly, we all thought she was slightly crazy, but, she would take it upon herself to make sure, and she would tell me regularly, she knows that I'm capable of more, but I was one of those kids where I didn't do exams well. So she would make an extra effort to make sure that I was mentally and emotionally prepared to do these things, and I would do well. I did a lot better after her. So for me, those are the differences that I think people always make reference to, that Zimbabwean education system is really good. And it is good because the curriculum that was set in the first place was tough, and it's meant to be tough. I mean, for me to say I'm failing, that means I'm getting 50%, not 49%, not 33%. It's 50%. And that no one ever wanted to be that kid. And no one, and that's the one grounding I would say, is that I had a very clear definition of passing and failing. There was no gray areas. And here there are a lot of gray areas around it, which I kind of understand, because they feel people aren't ready to handle failure. So they'll, I think the matric certificate now reads like a performance agreement of sorts, which to me doesn't make sense, because in the real world, there is passing and failing. You get the job or you didn't get the job. You got promoted, you didn't get promoted. It's not a degree of, but because that sense of I passed or I failed isn't so strongly, I want to say, rooted in the education system, it sets people up for disappointment in the future, because in their mind, a 33% pass means, I'm fine. But then in the real world, that means that, your salary scale, for example, is nowhere near where it needs to be, just to be making ends meet, given inflation and the way the economy is behaving. But that's something people weren't necessarily exposed to systematically, the way we were in Zim in primary school, is you pass and you fail. And so you grow up knowing that you had to work hard and not to be that kid sitting between 50 and 60%, And in my house growing up, my dad was an engineer, he was a civil engineer, and he was one of those people who pushed boundaries in his own capacity. And so he couldn't accept that his kids can't push boundaries either, just because we're talking about degrees of failure. So for him, he left when he finished matric. He used to tell us that the whole village or most of his community kept telling him, no, you know what, you've done so well with maths, you should go work with a postmaster and be an assistant postmaster. And he was like, no, fam, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do my own thing, head to the big city. Goes and he gets himself a scholarship to go and study in Canada. He came back, he worked for the government for a bit. Then he got himself a master's scholarship to go to NYU and do his master's there. And from then on, his career just, blossomed. I mean, he's worked in pretty much all the continents. His exposure to Asia and Europe and so he wouldn't, not necessarily being, your parent is a parent and will do want their best for their kids. But between that ethos that he had and the combination of the system saying there's a pass and fail, I feel it taught me that I can't just always accept status quo. And I can't just say that, okay, it's fine, I didn't get the job. No, I need to understand why didn't I get the job? And what could I have done better to get the job, for example? And if I wanted to move forward, what do I need to do? It taught me that self-awareness of you can't just say, okay, it's fine, and then fold your hands and hope that it comes together magically, which is something which I think a lot of people do inadvertently. We always seem to think, oh, no, it's people maybe who are in menial job sectors, who might have that mindset. No, I've seen it with experienced professionals who also adopt that process. And they're just like, well, it'll come together someday. It's going to come together, but you need to make the steps and you need to be very much aware of what your shortcomings are and what your successes are. And then you know what you're working with and you can have a proper plan. But like I said, that's what I feel those sort of influences in my education system in primary, have translated into my work life now. High school, I think, just taught me about office politics, to be quite honest.
How so?
because, I get there. The only, I think in East London at the time, there was a very small, I want to say, East African community. I think if there was 10 families, I might be exaggerating. And families with 3 or 4 kids, thereabouts. So now, East African, coming from Zim, my native language is Shona. I encounter Xhosa culture, which is a very strong culture. It's a very dominating type of culture. And something simple like because I didn't speak Xhosa, none of the black girls would want to play with me, literally, or interact with me. They would, avoid me. Except my one friend, Yulisa. We've been friends since standard 5. And she's based in New York and we're still very close. But I remember my first circle of friends consisted of Yulisa, a colored girl called Leola, and a white girl called Crystal. And that was it for a few years. And eventually people began to sort of get to know me and I began to get to know them. So I was that kid where I was sort of friends with everyone, but not really. But I found myself, because of that initial culture shock, very reluctant to connect with people. So I very much became an introvert, which was a complete opposite to what I was in Zim. I was very much an extrovert because I was confident in my community of what's going on. I understood, our little Kenya life going on and, moving to a different country. East London is a very small town. I mean, coming from somewhere like Harare, which is a major hub, East London, the city center is something like three main streets. And then that's it. And I just couldn't compute. So, it made me withdraw and become very much an introvert. I would, and I fell in love with books then. And so, but me withdrawing allowed me the chance to observe people and the cliques and all of that. And that's why I feel like high school taught me more about office politics than anything. Well, aside from the actual subject.
Maybe just for certainty, when you say by the cliques, are you referring to the groups or are you referring to the literal Xhosa cliques are?
No. I'm referring to the groups because that's the thing. Because if you think about something like Swahili and Shona, there's no cliques, there's no close, please, nothing, none of that. And then you come here and every other word there's a click and you're like, what am I hearing? And am I hearing correctly? And then, I remember it used to actually irritate me sometimes because there was the assumption that you're black, so you must be speaking Xhosa. You can't be in Eastern Cape and not speak Xhosa and be black. And it would irritate me as a child, and I would see how it would affect my mom because she was primarily at home with us when she moved because we moved because of my father's career. But it just irritated me that it was like, we connected with other African people in Zim. So why is it so difficult now? It's difficult because we're first of few, and it felt like there were such barriers. So it would irritate me that, basic principles of understanding a conversation just went out the window.
Listening to what you're saying, most times we look at those that we label outsiders, but we don't give ourselves the time to put ourselves in their shoes, to look at things from their perspective. And what you're sharing now is, as the so-called outsider, how does the world appear to you? So that's quite a useful insight. Thank you for sharing that. So you got to East London. Is that where you completed high school?
Yep, that was where I completed high school. By the time I finished, so when I got to East London, I was 12 at the time. Yeah, it was actually 2 weeks before my 12th birthday I moved to East London. I remember being upset because, in my mind, I had planned my 12th birthday party, but in Zim. But, and now I'm here in this foreign place. But no, that was also quite a year where I had to learn about, I think one of my biggest lessons about resilience, because getting there, they put me back a grade. So I could see, and the way they did it apparently was to help me. But I could see it especially with the maths curriculum, that I'm like, but I did this like a year and a half ago. Why are we doing this now? And, the rationale given, I didn't buy it. I was just like, this doesn't make sense, but okay. So it actually, upset me a bit, because it's like, no, but I should be further along. But, you're the new kid on the block. You're not sure who's who in the zoo and what you can say to a teacher, what you can't say to a teacher. Something like, which I found patronizing, but I understand the school at the time that I went to was a Model C school, which ironically, I wouldn't have typically gotten into except for one of my dad's new colleagues who had recommended to the headmaster that we should be considered because, they work together at the Department of Transport and there was that sort of connection. So, in hindsight, when I'm like, okay, I understand, the type of school that it was. But something like, I remember that my teacher wasn't happy with my handwriting. And I'm thinking, but I'm 12 and my handwriting's fine. So some of my earlier notebooks was just something simple like learning how to write in cursive. And, I just remember feeling very patronized, but I couldn't really voice my annoyance with my parents because I'm like, they're also under a pressure of having moved to a new community and we all have to adapt and we all have our cross to bear. So in the grand scheme of things, me and my cursive versus the fact that, my dad didn't understand what was going on with his department and something like the salary structure was very different, which I didn't know at the time, but I later found out. Like, something simple like where did he go? He went through a situation where they hired him, but they didn't tell him that he could get medical aid. So for something like 6-7 months, he was entitled to it, but he wasn't given it. And he only got told about it by his assistant, who then decided, actually, my dad is an okay guy. So therefore, I'll tell him about what he should be getting and not getting. But it speaks to why I'm coming back to this, because that high school period to me was, it was something where I just thought that, no, there's things that are making sense and not making sense. And I remember being relieved to leave, high school and finish and leave East London, but also feeling very concerned about, what did I just do for the last 5 years? Type of thing, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, at a relatively young age, maybe when you were now going through high school, do you remember knowing what you wanted to study post high school? And this question leads us to the next phase of your life where you complete high school and you go to university. Did you always want, or did you always know what you wanted to study? And what was that thing that you wanted to do? But perhaps to go into or lead us into those answers, you can start off by telling our listeners where you decided to study and perhaps what the reason was for making that choice.
So where I decided to study wasn't really my choice. The way it was decided by my parents. They wanted me to go to England. I was really against it. I didn't want to go. As far as I was concerned, I was going to UCT. because I liked the sound of UCT. You know, they'd come and done the campus drive and what. As for what I wanted to study, to be honest, I found myself being, you know, having good grades and being able to want to go into anything, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So this lovely high school of mine also had a career counselor, but I don't think she really helped a lot of us. It was a thing of, okay, here's a personality psychometric test, and this is what it recommends. And when I picked to study, it was kind of a happy compromise because I figured by the time I'm done studying, I should know what I want to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, something like I decided to pick law. Well, it's law and business. That was the degree I did, but it's the equivalent here would be a BCom law. And, you know, I thought that would be a happy compromise because if I then chose to focus on business, then I could do that and major in that. Or if I then decided to become a lawyer, I could become a lawyer and, you know, take it from there. For me, it just felt like the what and the why didn't really sit well with my spirit, but I was like, anyways, let me do the correct thing in life, go and get educated and and go from there. But I almost feel like what the letdown of it was that in high school, you know more or less what you don't want to do. But knowing what you actually want to do, I feel to me that's a huge, huge gap because if you do have, or if you are fortunate to have people come on campus drives, the people who typically come to high schools are your auditing firms, engineering firms. I think I even had, and then your university faculties will make targeted exercises of, you know, getting an interest. I remember someone coming to lecture about marine biology, and for a good few months I was keen on being a marine biologist. And a big part of that was me thinking, I'd be spending my time swimming half the time, as opposed to doing actual work. But so it was many of those, and then not so much from your law firms and that sort of thing. So most of the push was, no, you should go into accounting. And I mean, that was my highest grade, and it was like, and I remember consciously telling myself, just because I'm good at it doesn't mean I want to be in it or I should do it. I should pursue a career in accounting. Because at the time, I was convinced all accountants were boring. So, as you can see, the rationale wasn't really very rational. And this was me at a Model C school. So I can imagine someone not at a Model C school or an environment where they are at a school, but there's no career counseling whatsoever. And unless you have, I think, a strong influence from growing up, because growing up, my parents never restricted anyone. So in terms of, if I look at my family, I have people who are nurses, investment analysts, there's a journalist, there's a couple of teachers, there's people in, you know, talent acquisition, and these are my immediate siblings, because the grounding was whatever you do, decide. That's what they asked, my parents asked us, whatever you do, decide you need to do it well. So if I decided to become, I don't know, an actual marine biologist, then I must be the best marine biologist that I can be. He made a point of not prescribing that because I think that was based on his experience of being told he must go work for the postmaster. And had he listened, life would be very different for all of us. So that kind of is like the what and why. But yeah, I really did not know by the time I got to matric. By the time I wrote my last exam, got the certificate, I was still clueless as to what and where. But I chose that because I felt that it was a happy compromise.
It's quite interesting that I think for the majority of African students, and I happen to be one of those, you don't have a career counselor at your school. So I know in the cities you would have that. I also don't have a memory of someone coming to the school and sharing sort of what they do in their careers. So by the time you complete your matric, grade 12 or standard 10, you're beyond clueless. You don't know what you want to do, and you only make that decision on the first day when you have to register at varsity and someone asks you what you want to do, and they maybe say something you like, and that is when you make that decision. So it's quite interesting that for someone like you, even with the counseling that was provided as well as some exposure that you've had, it was still, or you had, it was still quite difficult, it sounds like, to decide. So did you decide eventually to go to the UK? Is that where you went to university?
So I did, and it sounds silly to say this. I did because if it was kind of a contentious debate between me and my parents. It was like, well, if we're going to pay your school fees, this is where we're sending you. So the sort of arrangement we had was that I said, okay, fine, I'll give it a bash for a year. If I really cannot stand it, I will come back, and that's I will go to UCT, and it's been a year of loss. And I think this is where this time period is what reminded me or showed me that what, at the end of the day, your parents sometimes know you a whole lot more than you know yourself, and they understand you a lot better than you actually think. And I say this because that generation of parents, and I'm speaking about my parents, they were not the lovey-dovey and validation type, and you know what I mean. They were not patting on the head. It was pass or fail, know what you want to do type of thing. So it was always hard to read or understand if they actually understood what was driving me at the time or not. And I went there, and to my surprise, I actually loved being there. A year came. I came back for holidays. I actually didn't want to come back for holidays. I wanted to actually stay and work, because that was the thing you do. That throughout the summer there, you get a job, and if you're smart about it, you can build up a nice cushion for yourself for the upcoming year. So that when you are back at school, you're not working necessarily as hard as you were. Because I remember in varsity, at some stage, I think I had something like 3 jobs going on. Or was it? Yeah, at some stage, yeah. So, and that was because, as much as they were covering the fees, my running costs, I was actually fortunate enough to stay with a sister of mine who was there. But still, my running costs, I had to cover myself. So I had 2 part-time jobs, and I was volunteering somewhere. And I was fortunate enough to find the part-time jobs that actually paid a decent wage, which also kind of got me into the banking space. Because my first, one of my first part-time job while I was at varsity was within a bank. It's called HBOS. I think it's still going. But at the time it was called Halifax, but it's now HBOS.
So you get to the UK and you've got your sister there. For someone of East African heritage who grew up in Harare and then spent the 5 years in high school in East London where you felt like an outsider, it's quite interesting how you moved from there to the UK, given that in East London you were presumably amongst other black students, the Xhosa guys.
Yes.
But they made you feel like an outsider. So now you're having to move continents from Africa to the UK. How was that experience? I mean, if you felt like an outsider in East London, how did you feel in actual London, so to speak?
I think the biggest thing for me was that there was a moment where I was like, in high school, people talk about, what happens in university. And, like I said, it goes back to the office politics. People we think are going to be really successful or really do well at a particular course. And, that sort of dynamic. That pressure was very prominent for me in high school. So when I get to the UK, I'm like, no one knows me here. I know no one here. This is actually a clean slate, minus office politics and all of that. So I literally am at will to experiment. And so, I did. I got involved. I got involved with the Students' Union. I got involved with, they used to call it the Afro-Caribbean Black Society. I got involved with, the Women's Caucus. And, and I met so many interesting characters, people. I mean, some of them I'm still friends with today. And for me, that was so welcoming. It was such a relief to just actually be me. Now, and this is a phase where I found myself going back to being an extrovert because it's a clean slate. I met people from Jamaica, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Greece, Iran, and also fellow Africans from Cameroon, mostly West Africans as well, because the black population in the UK is predominantly, I want to say, you can't say indigenous blacks because it's not indigenous blacks. There was a big drive for West Indians to move to the UK in the 70s and 80s, and that was somewhere between, a labor shortage of what was going on in the UK, and then you've got your West African population, which follows close by, and then there's the rest of us, other black people that follow. So for me, it was so interesting to connect with so many different people, it made the first year fly. I couldn't believe when it was now like, May and we're writing exams. And ironically, we did try to still keep to heritage because, there was a lot of, like I said, Zimbabweans. So we used to do something, it's very cheesy. We used to do a pub night. So once a week on a Wednesday, we'd take turns cooking pap stew and morojo or skumawiki, as we call it in Swahili.
Or a
At
pub
someone,
night, not pop
yeah,
night. Okay.
no, pap night. So we would do pap stew and we would always do it at this one student's house. His name was Edson, and we'd take turns between either actually doing the cooking or sourcing whatever it was that was required. And then we would then, it would be an opportunity to carry on in Shona and, and play card games and whatever, and just, sort of reconnect, because a lot of the students that were there didn't have families there, or maybe they had families, but the families were on the other side of the UK or in somewhere like Wales and things like that. And it was just acclimatizing, because a lot of the students, I want to say it was almost a split between people doing postgrad, so master's programs, and people doing undergrad programs. And so you would feel like you'd have friends for a year or friends for a few years, depending on what program and stream they were on. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised how much I liked it, how much I made the most of it. Yeah.
I want to highlight something you said. Here you are, someone of African origin, someone who, once again, is of East African heritage, spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe before moving to South Africa. And yet you say when you got to the UK, you found that you could be you.
When we moved, it was late 90s. And I'm not saying that, there weren't any foreigners in SA, but it's nowhere near the levels that it is now in terms of migration. And I think that's largely helped by what happened with Zim. And also the fact that when we moved, it was a very young South African democracy. It was 3 years old, basically. And, South Africa is still trying to figure out what is it about and what are we doing going forward. So, being an African in South Africa then and being an African in South Africa now are very different things. And I feel like, the sad or the lovely thing about the UK is that because they were the colonizers and there's commonwealth, or there was a commonwealth, that people, aspiring, wanting to do more, would move there. So you literally have very much a mixed community. You also get their social class issues that, that we would have. I remember something that fascinated me the most was, they call these, it's a very slang term, chavs. And so chavs are like what Americans would say maybe are white trash, or, a lower level of a white individual. So chavs are literally, when I say, they're just short of being gangs, because I remember at the time, I think it was my second year, there was this craze about happy slapping. It's literally, you'd be maybe on the bus or whatever, and if there's a group of these chavs misbehaving, they'd be going around, slapping people randomly. And I never forget reading one article where seeing a clip, where they slapped this elderly gentleman who then had a heart attack and died. Because, he got such a fright. And it was recorded, and those guys were prosecuted, so I think along the lines of involuntary manslaughter, something along those lines. So, UK itself was in a very awkward space, because they're doing the most for their own people. And then you've got these immigrants that are trying to integrate in all of that. And in all of that chaos, there's space to find you, or a happy place, I want to say. But I didn't feel like I could do life there. That's something I knew for sure. I knew for sure that long term, there's no ways I was going to be there for the rest of my life, have a family and do life there, because it just to me wasn't conducive. I was still conscious of, and I still am conscious of, where I grew up, that, I could walk to school and, I had friends, whereas there it's very, very possible for people to become very isolated very quickly. And that didn't sit well with my soul, type of thing. So that was a big part of the reason why I also left. But you are right. It is very sad that you have to then go to a foreign country sometimes and you find yourself. But that's the beauty, I think, of the way I've grown up. Because of these different experiences, I feel like if I had an opportunity to go to somewhere like Hong Kong tomorrow or next week, I legit could pack up and go and not be okay with it. Yes, there'd be the culture shock and all of that, but my being doesn't feel limited to that. At the same time, there are times when I'm like, you know what, I just want to set up a structure for myself and be in a space or an environment where, there's a constant. So, there's that dilemma for me based on being exposed and knowing that there's so much more out there. And I feel it's a disservice to, I want to say, our forefathers, parents, grandparents, their parents, that in the day and age where we can move, learn, do so much more, that someone makes a conscious choice to stay in the same neighborhood for 20 years and refuses to actually, explore and push boundaries just because they're in a comfort zone. To me, I'm like, when I think about what my forefathers went through and, barriers that my grandparents had, I feel like I'm insulting their heritage by choosing to consciously be in a safe zone because it's easier.
When you were now thinking of home, in inverted commas, what were some of the things that you missed about Africa? To move from having pub night to basically coming back to the continent where there is no pub night, it's pub all day, every day. What were some of those things that you missed about the continent?
I can tell you for sure the weather. I mean, I just, like, my first few weeks back, I was like, the way the sky was blue, that was something I used to, because when I came back, I wasn't able to start working straight away because I didn't have a job. So I'd spend some of my days outside in the grass just looking at the sky. Appreciating the fact that when I go to a supermarket, I'm not seeing bananas from Guyana or oranges from Israel because, nothing grew in the UK. So everything was imported. And based on EU regulation, you have to say where stuff was sourced from. I mean, those supermarkets, they have like 2 aisles or an aisle for potatoes. Every kind of potato you can think of because that's all that grows there. But everything else is sourced from outside. So, the weather, the food, for me, being able to just feel like, okay, I'm back here. And, Africa, I think when I came back 2010 was a very good year. And when I say good year, I mean there was a very good spirit about it. Everyone was excited about the World Cup and and the possibilities and and there was just this vibe of, we're actually crossing boundaries. It's a game-changing year because we're putting ourselves on a global stage for a sport everyone loves. And so, those are, I think, my first observations or key observations about being back and reminding me of what I missed while I was in the UK. Because, I mean, sometimes it would feel like, okay, I'm coming, I think for the 6 years that I was there, I think I came home in total like 3 times. When I say home to South Africa, and then a couple of times I went to Kenya. And I just miss the people. Because in the UK, people, they can be very, very, withdrawn. And so when I left varsity and I was working there for a couple of years, I remember the day I decided to actually, I've had enough now, was when I was on the tube going to work. It was something like between 7:30 in the morning. And, most people in the tube, we used to joke about it. But my sister used to tell me that you're not allowed to talk on the tube because literally no one talks on the tube. No one says anything, even on the escalators. No, it was a joke. You are allowed, but no one does. So she was pulling my leg and telling me that. So these tubes, the escalators are very much a similar fashion like how a train station would have. I'm coming up the escalators and there's a guy busking. He can't sing to save his life, but he's busking, and there was an elderly guy who was, behind me on the escalator, was also coming up. By the time he gets to the top, he starts screaming at this guy and swearing at him and telling him you're making such a bloody noise in the morning. Wada, 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 wada. And I remember thinking, okay, firstly, that's a bit extreme. Secondly, you just rolled out of bed wherever you're traveling from. You're probably in the last 2 hours or so, and you're so mad so early in the morning this cannot be life, like really and truly. And then I was like, nope. If that's what I have to look forward to being here, no, it's fine. I'm gonna go. But like I said, that's my experience. I know a lot of people who I studied with who decided to stay and they've made life for themselves there. But I remember like people will say things like, oh no, but aren't you going to miss the convenience of electricity? And I'm like, what do you mean the convenience of electricity? And I kid you not, this was from people. Two people told me this from Nigeria. They were like, no, but it's very different. There's blackouts. I'm like, there's blackouts here too. They happen here. Because I missed the whole load shedding phase. So when I came, I was like, okay, I know we've had blackouts before, but this is ridiculous. Yeah. But I remember thinking, are these two really serious? Are they telling me that I should not think about going home because I should be nervous about blackouts? And the one was like, oh no, but how are you going to get around and whatever. And I just remember thinking, I'll figure it all out when I get there, because that's the one thing we've been able to do as the Situmas is we adapt. We get there, we figure it out. And before you know it, you're laughing about that difficult time when you're like, what was happening there? So all of those things made me think that, no, you know what? I really miss being here. And I decided to come back. And, South Africa really does feel like it's my home, because it's aside from Zim, where it feels like I've spent the bulk of my life and bulk of my experiences here.
Actually, I like the line, the Situmas get there and they figure it out. It's quite a nice line. If we're going to switch attention maybe to more sort of your personal side, and the first question there sort of talks to some of the things that motivate you as well as some of the things that you find drain your energy. What would you say keeps you motivated moving from one day to the next?
I think for me, the fact that, the possibilities are endless, I mean, my phone cover, I have this thing that says the best is yet to come. And to me, that's important to have that level of optimism, or some kind of optimism, because, life is meant to be lived, and we all go through experiences and challenges that, make you question whether you really know what you're doing in your life. But at the same time, we can't stop. I can't decide today, oh, you know what, I had a crap day on Friday with my boss, and therefore I'm not going to. Okay, fine. It was a crap day. Why was it a crap day? What could I do better? What could I change? And, asking myself or teaching myself to ask those questions has created opportunities for me in the workspace, in my private space, where it leads to other motivations or other things that keep me going. So for me, it's about the fact that, but why not? I don't want to knock something until I've tried it. And that's what keeps me motivated to say, if this is what's possible now, what's possible in the future? What happens if I add a twist to this and, that sort of thing? And that speaks to how I was as a child, because I legit was that person in class always asking questions. And, people never used to understand, especially in East London. They'd be like, but why are you asking so many questions? Do you really care that much? I'm like, no. But if I have a full understanding of what's happening or not happening, then I can see other things about that same situation, and I suppose get an intuition or a foresight about it. And, that leads to other things. And I think that also came from that behavior, that mindset came from reading. Because, in high school, as I was an introvert, most of my time I spent with books. I used to have like 3 to 5 books on the go at the same time. And it would be everything from your cheesy romances to a Terry Pratchett to sort of biographical type of novels. And because I would get lost in those books, it stretched my imagination. And it would be like, but why not? So I see more opportunities more often than barriers. And to me, that's very important, because if there was a day and I woke up and I felt uninspired by, a conversation I had with the girl at Pick and Pay, for example, or I didn't, have a new thought or a new way of thinking about something, it would really depress me. In terms of what drains me, bad attitudes, people not caring, it drives me nuts sometimes, because it's like, it's not something you can necessarily teach people. It's either they want to or they don't. but it affects so much. It really affects so much because, something like sometimes I do extra hours at work and people are like, yeah, but you're not paid to do it. I'm like, yes, I'm not paid to do it, but I'm doing it because I want to perfect what I'm doing or get a jump start on the next day so that I'm in a better position to move forward. And that not caring attitude is very contagious. And, one person does it, another person does it, and then it's like, next thing you know, you have a whole bunch of people who don't care about what they're doing because they don't see the point or the relevance. And that's how you breed a society that I think is filled with resentment and annoyance. And then entitlement is close behind. And I'm like, guys, you can't do this. I remember in my previous job, I was sort of coaching, a colleague who had also started with, and I'd said to him, there's a lot of issues with quality, and I said to him, you need to pick up, and he was like, but why? And I'm like, here's why, because every time you have quality issues, society or corporate will say, you know what, we gave so and so a chance, he didn't make the most of it, so why do we bother giving people chances? So you're closing doors not only for yourself but for other people who might want to take that chance, but they're waiting for their turn, and you've now just blocked them because you didn't care enough to actually do your job well. After that, he was like, he thought about it, and for the time period that we were together at that company, he grew a lot more than he expected it, to be quite frankly, than I expected even. And I still tease him about it because he's like, no, but he didn't take me seriously, but he thought about it and it made sense. And I'm like, but that's all it took, was just somebody having a conversation about an attitude and approach. And here's somebody who's managed to, carve out a better space for himself within the corporate structure that we were in, which seemed a bit restrictive, because it seemed like all he wanted to do was just come do his 9 to 5 and go home. And now is involved in major pivotal things within the company. And that was because I had a conversation about attitude and approach.
I mean, there's one thing that stands out from what you're saying earlier about asking questions. And it's funny enough, this morning I read a quote which said that before you can think out of the box, you need to know what's in the box.
Exactly.
It's quite an interesting quote because we all think we sort of think out of the box and we want to think out of the box, but we don't take the time to fully understand what's in the box. So thank you, Vita, for sharing that. It sounds like you sort of a bit of an avid reader. Are there some books, if you believe that books can change a person's life, are there some books that you would say have contributed to the person that you are today? Maybe just to list 3 or 4 of those books. And what about those books changed your life?
So, because I think I'm an analytical person, a lot of my initial reading was about sort of fantastical sort of themes. So like your Terry Pratchett books are very fantastical. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is very, fantastical. And that to me just, it kickstarted off things in the sense that I felt that, okay, this is all fiction, and I know it's fiction. And I mean, these are things that are probably very unlikely. But it's teaching me that somebody sat down and put this on paper. Where he got his ideas from, his inspiration from, who knows? I mean, J.R. Tolkien writing Lord of the Rings, that book is so long to read. I really was happy that they had movies coming out because that book was painful to read. So it was painful to read, but the storyline really, again, about heroism and, good versus evil and all of that. They taught me about, the idea, the process. It can be something very fun, awesome and rewarding. Then I get a book like a biography a friend recommended to me in varsity, Wangari Maathai, her biography. I don't know if you know much about her, but essentially she was she unfortunately passed in 2011. She was a pivotal sort of grassroots activist in Kenya. And I remember reading her book, talking about how she got into activism and how her drive to get into activism around the environment, the Green Belt movement. She sacrificed a lot in terms of her home life. I remember reading about how life with the husband and kids was difficult because he couldn't comprehend, why is this person pushing this agenda and not doing things as a wife should do. Because believe it or not, Kenya is a very, 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 very patriarchal society. People think it's bad here, but over there it's even worse because women in politics just was not comprehensible. And she had a lot of weird and wonderful experiences. I mean, when she, initially started going out to communities and reaching out to women and empowering them, she remembers encountering women who also told her, but why are you even bothering? We know that we're supposed to be, the women of the house and, doing things as wives do. Why would we want to get involved with it? And then, you should, eventually she started winning minds in that sense. But even with all of that, she got more buy-in from, I want to say, Europeans in terms of what she was trying to achieve. So some support came from there. And, ultimately she did divorce her husband. And I remember reading a line, something along those lines, like she felt like she was free. And it was quite sad because, typically you would like to believe that, the institution of marriage should be about supporting one another at the very least. And, not being supported and then pushing the boundaries for your country to have a better environment for your kids. And knowing that your partner doesn't back that I can't even imagine that emotional dilemma or stretch because it's hard. And I mean, you're facing the rest of the world basically and trying to get buy-in and deal with corrupt officials and corrupt Kenya. But she pushed the boundaries and she didn't give up. And in her book, I'd like to believe she had the attitude of being positive. And in most of, her pictures, if you look at that smile says, you know what, I'm still here and I'm still going and I'm still doing. And that to me was like, and that was a time between, if I'm not mistaken, between the 70s and 90s was the most challenging time for her. And, she did so much. So you read something like that and you're like, okay, I don't know if I could be on her level. I don't know if but I know that wherever I am, in whatever I do, I need to impact people in a positive way. I cannot let people leave me or leave, an experience with me as a negative. They need to go away with a positive, whether it's helping them think about a situation or solve something or, give them some sort of inspiration and go ahead. That's what I can do is that the people around me, people I come across, I can't allow hate to exist in me because it just breeds more hate. And, people think, but does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? It does because, the more hate and resentment breeds, the less progress will happen because it's contagious. It's always easy for people to just be in a negative rather than the positive. And I mean, she faced death threats at one stage. I think at one stage they petrol bombed her house because they really felt she was being out of order. And I just remember coming away from the book thinking that, you know what, I have no excuse. So whatever I can, whenever I can, I should do and I will do. And that was, that was one of the pivotal books, growing up. Most recently that I've read, there's a book by the South African author Carol Mashiko. She wrote a book called The Yearning, which, to be quite honest, when I initially started reading it, I was just like, no, what is happening here? Because essentially in this book, it's, discussing the journey of somebody getting in touch with, as they would say, amadlozi and, that type of side of her life. And I just remember reading and just, being like, oh my gosh. But then as I got into the book, I actually thought about it. I'm like, it's something we never really were exposed to or discussed as a family about, ancestors and spirits and all of that, which there is a practice and there is a space for it in Kenya. But reading that book just helped me put some of those things into context. I still profess to know very little about it, but it helped me understand that sometimes it's not about someone waking up one day and saying they're going to be Sangoma, for example. It's about that, spiritual experiences happen on different levels.
Yeah.
And it depends on how in touch you are, whether you want to say it's about God or, Allah or whatever the case is. But, we're spiritual beings as people. That's what that book taught me. And that it means you will have many spiritual experiences that make sense or sometimes don't make sense, but don't be afraid of them. Be true to yourself and be in touch with yourself and be at peace. So that's, one of the most notable books I've read recently.
Yeah, interesting choices. I'm starting with Wangari Maathai. Oh, funny enough, she became the first African woman and the first environmentalist to win the Nobel Prize, which
Yep.
could argue that that is the ultimate recognition from your peers. Maybe,
Yes.
Evita, as we start wrapping up, we'll have about 5 or 6 rapid-fire questions just to
Okay.
close up the discussion. Sort of easy questions. The first one being sort of when you're not thinking about global issues or when you're not working, what are some of the hobbies that sort of remind you of who Evita Situma is? Do you have any hobbies?
Um, well, aside from talking, believe it or not, I'm going. For me, walking. That I think is it's in me. Sometimes if I really just, had a good day, bad day, walking for me, walking is a thing for me. I've progressed into running. I used to hate running as a kid or younger. I just was like the thought of doing a 5K or 10K, anything. I was like, nope. But I really enjoy it. Sport is my outlet, so I do try and work out and keep on that level of things. But no, swimming I love. I just don't have access the way I used to, or as you grow up, women, we're about but swimming and then sorting out my hair and all of that. So those are the things that typically when I'm not working, I like to get involved with. But also mentoring. It's not really a hobby, but it kind of feels like it is. So I'm mentoring a couple of people at the moment. I'm mentoring a second-year student. I was mentoring a high school grade 10 pupil. But it's a hobby which I'm hoping to turn into something more tangible, because I really feel that career development, counseling, it's a big need, and there has to be better ways or more practical ways of applying it that's accessible to everyone, and I'm not just thinking about South African schools. I mean, predominantly, all over. That's those are the things that I focus on when I'm not working or thinking about global issues.
I actually like the fact that you think of mentoring as a hobby, because for me, a hobby is something that you do out of your own will. So if you think of it as a hobby, the people that are being mentored get the full value, but for you, it feels like it's a passion project. So presumably you'll go at it at full throttle. The next question asks for, do you have any favorite quotes that you live by? Do you have something on the mirror that you wake up every day and you look at and you feel like, now I'm ready for the day? What's your favorite quote, if you have any?
Challenge your perceptions or they'll challenge you.
Okay, nice. It's a new one for me.
That for me, it's just, it's very simple, poignant, but it makes and applies to a lot of things. It makes a lot of sense.
Thank you for that food for thought. And do you have a favorite TV show?
So, it's a bit of nerd side of me. I'm a Star Trek fan. That I will watch all versions of Star Trek at any point in time. It's really, and it's if people know me, they're like, no, but really, fam, we know you're into things, and it's just literally the fascination of life in outer space, legit existing communities and all of that. I'm not saying I want the world to end and that sort of thing, but so Star Trek, I would, I've watched reruns, the movies, and that sort of thing. I think a more recent episode which really sort of, it's a toss-up. It's been a toss-up between House of Cards and Game of Thrones.
How can that possibly be a toss-up?
No, when I say they both, if you think about it, it's office politics on steroids in both instances. We've got the White House, and then you've got Westeros on the right hand. And it's just how things come together and fall apart in these relevant TV series, where I'm like, really? But it was tough to choose between the two. So I'm just going to leave those two next to each other.
So it's so tempting to go down that rabbit hole of Game of Thrones. But we'll probably leave that for another day.
Okay, cool.
If you had a billboard, or if you could put a message on a billboard, what would it say?
Yeah, I actually thought about that. Funny enough, I actually do have a billboard because somebody sent me a picture because Evita is playing. The play is actually on at the moment. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm back in business. But I think it's very cheesy just to wake up and be awesome. That would be what my billboard is.
I like that's not cheesy at all. Wake up and be awesome.
And that's it. Like, I mean, awesome is you, and you are awesome, and just do you. And if everyone just did them and did it well, the world would be very different, or people would be very different.
Ah. But I love some people say do you because there's really only one version of you, so it's your
That
responsibility to do you.
To do you, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe as we wrap up, Evita, do you have any last words of encouragement for some of our listeners? I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who will find a lot of fascination within your story.
I think for me, it's just, guys, it's boundaries are set by people who think they know what's best for people. And sometimes that's not the case. And if that's not the case for you, challenge them. Ask the questions. Like literally ask questions. It's something that has served me well and taught me many lessons, because by asking questions I've learned better things about failures, and been able to motivate for different things going forward. But don't just accept status quo. That would be my words of encouragement. And some people might see that as a political statement, but to me, if status quo was really working for everyone, the world would be a much happier place. And if it's not working for you, change it.
Evita, thank you very much for agreeing to be part of our project. I truly, truly appreciate your time, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed this as much as I did. We hope to speak to you in future when you're doing even bigger things. To all our listeners, you've been listening to the Kungana Africa project, and this was one of the 1,000 voices that we plan to record. Kungana Africa, one voice at a time. Please join us next time as we bring you another interesting and exciting voice. You can find us on facebook.com/Kungana 1000 African Voices, or go to the podcast platform Podbean and search for Kungana. Till next time, take care. Cheers.